Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. Well, on Fridays, my morning musings are normally dedicated to responding to the critics, to doing a review of books that have been written that supposedly refute covenant eschatology, what have you. And just recently, Derek Lambert, a former preterist who is now an atheist, he and I were discussing the dating of Revelation, the application of Revelation. And I suggested to Derek that he get somebody to debate me on his blog on the dating of Revelation and its application. Well, he tried, but he couldn't get anyone. And so he actually suggested on one occasion that he would have me on and we'd just simply have a dialogue, a discussion. I said, that's perfectly fine with me. But he said, I won't debate you on the topic. Again, that was perfectly fine with me, but he never would do that. So finally, when I pressed him just a little bit, he said and recommended to me this book, The Future of Rome. And Derek claimed that this book would answer anything and everything that I have to say about the book of Revelation, its dating and application. Well, I bought the book. It's not cheap. And as I pointed out to you last week, the first 16 chapters are basically totally irrelevant for the purpose of dating the book and for the purpose of discovering the interpretive application of the book. Now, that's not to say that the previous 16 chapters are not helpful from an understanding of Roman historians and their view of the future of Rome. But what Roman historians had to say about Rome and her future has nothing to do, because the Roman historians that this book cites were literally hundreds of years before Revelation was ever written. So just exactly how is this relevant? And because those Roman historians, the church had not been established, those Roman historians knew nothing about the church. There's just nothing about the record of those Roman historians that is in any way applicable to a proper interpretation of the book of Revelation. And so it made me ponder, well, okay, what did Derek have in mind? Now, again, that doesn't mean that stuff is not interesting. I shared some of that with you last week. One of the most fascinating chapters, actually two chapters, is the speech, a masterpiece of ancient rhetoric, by the way. And I've learned a lot about the use of rhetoric by reading the book. But Agrippa made a speech to the Jews before the walls of Jerusalem. Incredible speech, trying to get them to lay down their arms. But the speech has nothing to do with the book of Revelation. Nothing. Secondly, we have the speech of Josephus in chapter 16. Well, once again, it's absolutely fascinating to know that here's Josephus, who was one of the leading members of Jerusalem society. He was a priest, and he actually served as a general in the Jewish army resisting the Romans initially. He was captured and became the personal historian and secretary, if you please, to Vespasian. That's because he did a major suck-up job. But nonetheless, so in reading Josephus, we can begin to get a contemporary view of what the Jews thought at the time. But you have to understand that to a great extent, Josephus's record of the siege and the war between Rome and Jerusalem was to a certain extent a panegyric history. Now that's a big word. What is panegyric? Well, Josephus was trying to justify himself. He was trying to make himself look good, trying to make the Jews out to be somewhat righteous because, after all, their holy law was being violated by the Romans, all at the same time trying desperately not to offend his Roman benefactors and get kicked out. So there's a lot going on in Josephus. Now, that doesn't mean that his record of the actual historical facts is not great, it's not applicable, etc. It just simply points out that Josephus had some ulterior motives in the things that he wrote. And we got to be aware of some of those things. But again, although he was contemporary, all right, nothing that I'm aware of, nothing that I found in his speech could be used as an interpretive key to help us date the book of Revelation. Now, except in this sense, okay? Josephus believed that Daniel chapter 9 was being fulfilled in the events of the war of 66 to 70. He cites Daniel chapter 9, 24 to 27, and he said that prophecy was being fulfilled in his day. Well, guess what? Daniel 9 foretold the AD 70 destruction of Jerusalem. Now, does that mean that the book of Revelation cited Daniel? Well, there's some things in the book of Revelation that certainly kind of give one pause. Now, nowhere does it say in the book of Revelation this was done to fulfill Daniel, for instance. Although John in Revelation does echo Daniel chapter 12 directly in its citation of the destruction of Jerusalem, the destruction of the power of the holy people more specifically, and even more specifically to the time of the resurrection. But wait, Daniel chapter 12 said that resurrection would be at the time when the power of the holy people was completely shattered. Now, in that sense, we can absolutely appeal to Josephus, okay? But nothing in his speech correlates directly to the book of Revelation. We only have the book of Revelation's use of Daniel, and thus then we can appeal to Josephus, not his speech, but to his record, and we can see the correlations. I'm simply trying to show that the first 16 chapters of this book, The Future of Rome, does not address the dating or the application of Revelation at all. Unless I missed something. I'm going to go back and I'm going to reread the chapter on Josephus' speech. I've actually read his speech several times in my life. Magnificent speech, very important speech. But nonetheless, I'm going to go back and just look for hints and clues and suggestions of anything that he might have said that might have a bearing on the dating and application of Revelation. So, with all of that preamble said, all right, we come to chapter 17 that was written by a man by the name of Peter Oakes. Now, I've got to tell you this. Peter Oakes is obviously quite an academic, a true scholar, but when he comes to discuss the future of Rome, the title of his chapter is Revelation 17, 1 to 10, a prophetic vision of the destruction of Rome. I will challenge that claim with everything that's in me. I do not believe that Revelation 17 or 18 or 19 has anything to do with the dating and the application of the book of Revelation. So what I want to do today is just to begin a very, very preliminary examination of a couple of things that Mr. Oakes says at the very beginning of the chapter that are, in my estimation, actually critical keys for understanding Revelation when it was written, what it's about. And yet Mr. Oakes just glosses right over them, does no linguistic examination of them, does no examination of the prophetic background of the statements and the language, but again, simply glosses right over them and I guess expects us to ignore them as well. Here's what I mean, that he mentions something, then glosses over it, either failing or refusing. I don't know which. I would say refuses initially. But it is a statement that he makes, and this is on page 206. Let me read the chapter here at the bottom of the page as he gives an outline for the book of Revelation. Quote, in Revelation 16, 7 angels pour out in succession the 7 last plagues that complete the wrath of God. When the 7th angel pours the 7th plague from its bowl, various catastrophic consequences occur, especially an unprecedentedly large earthquake, chapter 16, 18, which splits the great city in 3. The cities of the nations, the Gentiles, also fall. Moreover, Babylon the Great was remembered before God to give her the cup of the wine of the wrath of his anger, chapter 16, 19. Islands flee and hills disappear. A plague of hailstones torments people who respond by blaspheming God. The, quote, remembering, unquote, of Babylon sets the scene, you got to catch this, sets the scene for the subsequent chapters. Well, I agree with that last statement, but here is something that Mr. Oakes, once again, either purposely or inadvertently, completely overlooks. That is the concept that Babylon was remembered before God. You know, ladies and gentlemen, certain words are used throughout the Tanakh, the Old Testament, that have tremendous theological importance. For instance, the word covenant. It's almost impossible to overemphasize the importance of that word. I would suggest to you that this word remember has an incredible amount of theological significance that most commentators absolutely ignore. Now, I have an in-depth discussion of it in my book, Who is This Babylon? Let me remind you again, this is not part of my March 2023 two-book special, which there's a marvelous banner on my website now where you can go and look, donkpreston.com. Nonetheless, if you order this book while I'm doing this review, however long it takes, I will refund your shipping. That's saving you $6.95. So in this book, I examine the word that is translated in the Old Testament and then carried over into the New, that is translated as remember or remembered. It is the Hebrew word zakar. Now, you and I might think of remembering. Oh yeah, oh my goodness, I remembered. My wife wanted me to go to the grocery store. And as a matter of fact, I just remembered, in actuality, my wife wants me to go to Walmart. Glad I said that. We just need these little reminders every once in a while. Well, that's not the way the word remember is used in the vast majority of cases in the Old Testament. Now, I can't even list for you all of the places where the word zakar is used. But this is an ultra brief list. Okay. In Exodus 2:24, God heard the groaning of the children of Israel in Egyptian bondage, and it says he remembered his covenant with them. Now, here's the point I want you to catch. The word zakar, remembered, and its equivalent word in the book of Revelation, is related to a covenantal remembrance. In other words, when God remembered Israel doing something good, doing something evil, when God remembered Abraham and his covenant with Abraham, then he was doing precisely that. He was bringing the covenant to mind, either the law of blessings or the law of cursings. It is not simply, I remember Abraham, good dude. No, I remember the covenant. Psalms 106:45. For their sake, Israel's sake, he remembered his covenant. Hosea 8 verse 13. Quote, for the sacrifices of my offerings, they sacrifice flesh and eat it, but the Lord does not accept them, nor will he remember their iniquity, now he will remember their iniquities and punish their sins. In Hosea 9:9, the prophet spoke of Israel. They are deeply corrupted, as in the days of Gibeah. He will remember their iniquity. He will punish their sin. You see, he is remembering their sin because their sin was a violation of Torah. Jeremiah 14:10, thus says the Lord to this people, thus they have loved to wander. They have not restrained their feet. Therefore the Lord does not accept them. He will remember their iniquity now and punish their sins. What's God saying by using zakar? And again, the word remember in Revelation 16:19 is the equivalent of that. It is not simple or simply mental recall. And here's what that means. When God remembered the sin of Babylon, that sin was a violation of God's covenant with Babylon. Now let me ask you a question. It's a question that Mr. Oakes absolutely ignores, but it's fundamental to understanding Revelation 16 and following, even as Mr. Oakes admits, chapter 16, when it mentions remembering Babylon, that sets the stage for understanding the rest of the book. Amen. But he says Babylon is Rome. So let me ask you a question. When was Rome ever in a covenant relationship with Yahweh? You know the answer to that. He never was. So if it's true that zakar and the New Testament equivalent for remembered carries with it the idea of covenantal remembrance, and if it's true that God was never in a covenant with Rome, then it must be true that Rome is not Babylon, because Babylon was remembered in a covenantal sense by God. Folks, only one nation had a covenant with God. That was Old Covenant Israel. With Jerusalem as the center, with Jerusalem as the epicenter, and the symbol with the temple, the holy place, the most holy place. That place represented God's covenant with Israel. So at the very outset of the book, The Future of Rome, it appears to me that Mr. Oakes is guilty of an egregious oversight. He has failed to do his homework because he's already convinced that Babylon is Rome. Therefore, he completely ignores or overlooks, we give the benefit of the doubt here, overlooks what is one of an incredibly important word for understanding the dating and the application of the book of Revelation. Well, I'm out of time for this morning, so I will call it quits now, but I will show you how zakar, in a key Old Testament prophecy that is used by John in Revelation 21 and 22, and how it relates to the dating and the application of Rome. Now look, in the meantime, like I said, do yourself a favor and order my book, Who Is This Babylon? You'll see the application and the meaning of zakar in this book. Go to my website, DonKPreston.com, BibleProphecy.com. Go to the store, order the book. Just make a note that you saw the offer on YouTube's and the review of The Future of Rome, and I'll refund your shipping. Okay? Thanks again for joining me. Don't forget, join me this evening with Michael Sullivan as we continue our examination of the Song of Moses as it relates to the recent debate between Michael Brown and Steve Gregg. Okay? It's going to be great. I'll see you there.